if the Gaza Strip is evacuated, I guarantee you're going to have a nuclear scramble all over the Arab world. And this poker play, in my opinion, is completely mad. I mean, I couldn't put it any other way. You've got the tunnel systems, you've got the ruins. It always comes down to the infantryman and his rifle there. And remember that the Israeli army is really armor-centric. Back in the day, they had one armor division for every infantry division. Armor is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem more than a solution. Israel has one of the worst borders in the world, right? Who is Benjamin Netanyahu? That's quite interesting. People don't know his background. When you want to study the nuances of the situation there, you have to understand you've got at least 3 Zionisms.
To divert ammunition from Ukraine to Israel. And this is what's been happening.
Basically, the Palestinian people is the Peleshet of the Bronze Age collapse. If Hezbollah invaded Israel, Israel would bomb Iran. Okay. Know that.
Do you think that after Gaza Strip, this follow-up operation would be in the West Bank?
The West Bank would be next, no doubt.
Welcome, everyone. I have a very special guest, Idriss Aberkane. He invited me twice on his channel, and now it's my turn. He's an author, analyst, and journalist. Thank you.
Well, really thanks, Alexander. It was a pleasure having you on my channel. Actually, you did really great. We had you back-to-back 2 episodes, one after another. And you've already been hailed as one of the most quoted analysts on the Ukraine war. So it's really an honor to be on your channel.
Thank you. Thank you. So here today, we're going to talk about the situation in the Middle East. We're going to talk about Israel, Palestine, Gaza, everything. Now, the big news right now is that Netanyahu rejected a ceasefire in Gaza. He doesn't want the hostages back. And Israel now is in the process of launching a full-scale war. It's not only ground operations. They're going to go all in. And at the same time, Egypt is closing its border to all the Palestinian refugees that are pushing south because of the fighting. What do you think about all this?
Well, as you know, the situation is way more complex than some politicians want to acknowledge. And what's going on here is that Netanyahu has a specific agenda that he would never have been able to pass, especially to pitch to the Knesset, to the parliament, to the Israeli Congress. And this agenda, of course, is the evacuation of Gaza, which is not quite in the interest of Israel overall. And we could try to understand why he's doing that. But the agenda right now is this one. And this is creating a very volatile situation because let's go to the beginning of the volatility. Say, we've never been closer to a nuclear war, a shooting nuclear war, than even more, say, the Cuban crisis. The Cuban crisis is way more famous because the press covered it quite extensively, and it was a huge stake for the Kennedy administration. And it's also, as you know, the reason that the Kennedy administration wanted to get rid of CIA. But actually, there was a worse moment in Europe, which was the Able Archer NATO exercise. You had a military exercise in 1983 called Able Archer. And this was actually the closest we ever got to a shooting nuclear war, especially because the press didn't cover it that well. What's good with the press covering it is that it might be anxiety inducing, but in the end, having a lot of civilians talking about it usually cools the heads off. And you saw that, with the famous song by The Police, by Sting, right? Russians love their children too, right? Just calm down and let's just try to adopt the opponent's point of view and see that they do love their children as well, and they don't want to see them annihilated by a thermonuclear strike. As you know, the Russians have detonated the largest bomb ever, which was the Tsar Bomba, detonated in Nova Zemlya, in an island north of Siberia. Mm-hmm. And it was in the 60s, and it was the largest man-made explosion ever, 50 megatons. And in fact, they downgraded it. It was supposed to be a 100 megatons explosion, but they limited it, they bridled it to 50 megatons. Just to give you an idea, in the case of France, I'm a French citizen, if you detonated it over Paris, you would hear it in Barcelona. You would hear it in Barcelona and Rome. and the radius of destruction would be about 1/3 of France. So these are the weapons we have. So in the context now, you had, of course, the United States deploying the USS Gerald Ford, the largest ship ever built, and the USS Eisenhower. And Putin responded by being very clear that he wanted to put in high alert 24/7 MiG-31s equipped with Kinjal missiles that can basically strike one of those aircraft carriers in about 240 seconds. 240 seconds with a hypersonic missile. Of course, that can carry a nuclear warhead as well. And the Kinjal missiles are not even the fastest that Russia has. You're talking about, some of their hypersonic gliders. They can go Mach 17 up to Mach 20 times the speed of sound. And Russia has also showcased nuclear-powered torpedoes that can basically remain at sea forever. The problem with nuclear submarines is that the crew has to eat, and in the end, you don't have any more food. The nuclear reactor can actually work as long as you want, but the crew needs to eat, and in the end, they can't stay more than, say, 3 months tops. But those nuclear torpedoes, the Poseidon torpedoes, they can pretty much stay at sea forever, and they can create a tsunami. So I want your audience to know that Russia has warned quite clearly. You had Putin being shown with the Shaget, the nuclear suitcase, the nuclear football, as they say, and Putin never does that randomly, right? This is a clear signal there, and he wanted to be filmed, to be seen with the nuclear suitcase at the latest Belt and Road Initiative meeting in China. Moreover, he also launched a few vectors in Russia. You're talking about those hypersonic vectors. He didn't launch them at full speed, but just to see if they were working. And now a lot of leaks happened showing that they were also making simulations, because, as you know, you don't learn nuclear war by doing it, right? You don't learn by practice. So they're running a lot of simulations, and one of the simulations was about having 1/3 of the Russian populations vanish.
But
so
what do you think with Israel right now?
But the thing is, there was a leak recently regarding the fact that Egypt would close the border, the fact that Netanyahu would refuse a ceasefire. And this leak was published by WikiLeaks. It's been authenticated. It was in Hebrew. And indeed, the Likud plus Ben Gvir, Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, we really have to delve deeper into who these people are, what's their agenda, because they don't quite have Israel's best interest at heart at the moment. And it shows, it really shows. So much so that former Israeli PM Ehud Olmert has really openly criticized Netanyahu there on the way he's handling the situation. And you even saw people in the streets of Israel with slogans, with catchphrases saying, take Bibi, take Netanyahu, and give us the hostages. So you had those kinds of catchphrases in the streets of Tel Aviv. So what it has to do with the situation is that, why are we close to a nuclear shooting war? Where you're just talking about the evacuation of Gaza? Right? It's not really just that, but that's a big issue, right? So you had this leak saying, okay, Likud and the current Netanyahu-Ben Gvir administration is considering evacuating Gaza, all of Gaza altogether, pushing it to Egypt. And then, all bets are off, because Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood organization, which is forbidden in Egypt. Al-Sisi can never accept that. Moreover, if he did accept it, it would be a political problem for Egypt, because he would be seen as a traitor to the Palestinian cause. So in the entire Arab world, it would be there would be a massive a movement of indignation, if you will, of outrage, right? And right now, what's going on is that for the first time in its existence, the state of Israel has managed to unify the entire Muslim world. You're talking from say, Rabat in Morocco to Jakarta, Indonesia, to Kuala Lumpur, to you name it, right? To Malaysia, to even the Uyghurs in China, to Xinjiang. They're now unanimous in condemning Israel, which is a terrible diplomatic position. And it's a position that Israel has never gotten itself into, especially when the left was in power, when you had Ben Gurion and Golda Meir. Even though she was called the Iron Lady, she would never have allowed such a terrible diplomatic situation to happen.
But So right now, how do you see the situation? Like we expressed, well, you expressed the situation that LCC doesn't want the Palestinians to come into his country. In my opinion, it's because a lot of the Arab countries in the region too, they fear this Palestinian resistance and bringing the problem into their country. We've seen it in Jordan, we've seen it in Lebanon, and bringing these people into Egypt might put Egypt in the same situation as Lebanon with Hezbollah, meaning Israel could bombard Egypt in the future if that happens.
Yeah, you've got at least a double problem if you do such a thing. I mean, even putting aside the problem of international law, because that would be illegal. That would actually be illegal. That would be akin to, say, cleansing. I mean, you're moving a population that's in majority innocent, though. What's the situation with Gaza, the Gaza Strip to begin with? That's 2.2, 2.5 million people. About 2/3 of them are less than 24. So you're talking about a young population. That can be influenced quite a lot. That's true, and it's been released, it's been published, especially by left-wing journals in Israel. Haaretz, for example, published that minutes of discourses, speeches by Netanyahu, saying that funding Hamas was the right thing to do. He declared that publicly in 2019, because the rationale was that funding Hamas is a way to counter the PLO, the Fatah of Mahmoud Abbas, now Yasser Arafat at the time, which was reaching a political solution for a two-state solution, and which had abandoned violence. They had been a terrorist organization long time ago, seen as such. Of course, as you know, it can be quite relative from time to time, but still they had renounced violence in the euphoria of the situation in South Africa in the 90s and the end of the Cold War. And the Fatah had renounced violence, recognized the state of Israel, which Hamas doesn't, and they were about to achieve a two-state solution. What happened was that Yitzhak Rabin, who was left-wing, was assassinated by the Israeli right-wing, which is a quite interesting situation, because from the outside, since Israel is quite a small country, people have a rather monolithic appreciation of their politics, but in fact they're way more divided, and you've got way many more trends that can be quite opposite to each other, sometimes in a deadly way, since you had Yitzhak Rabin being assassinated by the right wing. So right now the Gaza Strip is separated from the West Bank, which is dominated by the Fatah, and could have achieved a two-state solution. You have to understand that the Netanyahu-Ben Gvir administration is completely alien to such a situation. They don't want a two-state solution. They've made it absolutely clear, and so they don't want that to happen. So their agenda is that Gaza should belong to Israel, and that the Palestinians of Gaza should be evacuated. Now, if Egypt accepted such a thing, well, you really would have to make the deal really sweet. So you have the United States talking about printing some more dollars, after all, to erase the external debt of Egypt, right? So that would be $130 billion, which is nothing, because just the Pentagon's budget, Pentagon's plus Department of Energy, which is also handling the nuclear weapons in the United States, you're talking about 720 billion each year, right? So 120, and of course the public debt in the United States is 34 trillion. So that's nothing, right? That would be really easy. Okay, but Al-Sisi, the head of state of Egypt right now, of course knows that this would be nothing. It would just be a print job, if you will, and he's not going to accept just on that ground. Plus, of course, the second problem would be that you would have a lot of Muslim Brotherhood sympathetic people in Egypt. Okay, Egypt is 109 million people, so we're talking about a third of the population of the United States. It's the most culturally influential country in the Arab world. That's the other problem. The entire Arab world would see it as treason, because right now, and what a lot of Israelis have not appreciated yet, is that the leaking of this plan, plus the leaking of those discourses where Netanyahu acknowledged that Hamas was, in his opinion, which is not the majority in Israel whatsoever. Remember that you have a parliamentarian system where with just 20% you can take power, which is what happened with Netanyahu. His approval ratings were below 20%, in fact, but still is in power, right? along with the writer wing, if you will, of Ben Gvir. And the publication of all that has caused outrage. You've seen people in Pakistan tearing the Israeli flag with their teeth. Now, I need not remind you that Pakistan is a nuclear power. Moreover, as Colonel McGregor has underlined really well, and I quite like and appreciate his analysis, Colonel McGregor has made clear that Pakistan could provide nuclear weapons to Turkey in case of a shooting war. Of course, it wouldn't be that fast, but that's still a possibility. So Turkey has 2 million people they can mobilize. They can mobilize 2 million soldiers. And Turkey is, of course, the main sponsor of the Muslim Brotherhood at the moment. So if Egypt accepted, it would be a catastrophe in the Arab world. It would be seen as treason, and it would cause lasting outrage against Israel in the entire Muslim world. You're talking about nuclear escalation. You're talking about right now, you already have the Sunni and Shia being united. What the hell? It never happened in the entire history of Israel. It never happened. Now you've got the Hezbollah, which is a Shia militia. Well, you can't really call it militia anymore. They've got more than 150,000 soldiers. They're really well equipped, usually with Russian-made weapons, unlike Hamas, which is in fact equipped with American-made weapons. They're kind of failing to mention that, but they've managed to procure those weapons through corrupt people in Ukraine, and it's worked really wonders. So their inventory has NLAWs, their inventory has javelins, the latest missiles, especially in urban warfare. And they've got also night vision goggles. So you're talking about some serious equipment there, but Hezbollah is more equipped. Usually Hamas and Hezbollah would not be acting together. And in fact, Hezbollah has made clear in the latest discourse of Hassan Nasrallah that they were not aware of the situation. Even the New York Times has said as well.
Do you believe that they were not aware?
To be honest, I'm positive. Thank you for that question. I'm positive that they were not aware of it because the situation is terrible for Iran. Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, just like the Houthi, the Houthi who control half of Yemen, and they've declared officially war on Israel. And they've launched a few symbolic strikes, if you will. They've not killed anybody, but they've shown that their resolution in a way, even though the same goes for Hezbollah, they're shooting cameras, they're shooting optronics on the border, but they're not killing anybody so far because Iran doesn't want an escalation at the moment. And rightfully so, because they're in a tight spot. Iran doesn't have the nuclear bomb yet, but they will really rush to have it if, for example, the Gaza Strip is evacuated. You can be sure there will be a nuclear scramble in the entire region. In Egypt, the Egyptians will try to get the nuclear weapon. The Iranians will try to get the nuclear weapon. Who will prevent them from doing so? Turkey will try. Turkey has the technology. You need to remember that getting a nuclear weapon is quite easy. I mean, there's only one logistical bottleneck in terms of the value chain, if you will. Making nukes, you need. There are two bottlenecks, but usually the second one is already delivered. The second bottleneck, let's start by this one, are the vectors, the missiles. You need missiles. Well, the Iranians already have hypersonic Russian missiles. They've renamed them Fatah, which means victory in Arabic. Though they don't speak Arabic, right? They speak Farsi, and they're showcasing them in the streets. You've got, like, of course, they're not showing the true missiles, but they're showing pictures of them. They put them on condos, like you've got the facade of condos with an advertisement for those missiles, where you see Fatah 240 seconds to Tel Aviv, or 300 seconds to Tel Aviv, something, or no, maybe 400, but less than 400 seconds. All right, 400 seconds to Tel Aviv, and they show the numbers in a 24, the series 24 style in a font, as if it was a chronometer, and so they have the vectors already. The real bottleneck is the enriching. Sorry, you need. How do you call them? Centrifuge, right? I forgot the name. Yeah, in English. Well, you need those because you need to have the right isotope of uranium, and separating it from the wrong needs those huge centrifuge systems, and they're the ones that Israel managed to hack, along with the help of the NSA with Stuxnet. It was a very successful attack. The Mossad in Israel has also managed to assassinate one of the a few leading engineers and one of them also in the hypersonic missile technology as well. They remote control assassinated him. So they assembled 1-ton equipment in a car. I think it was a Nissan car, and they put a remote controlled gun in it, plus explosives to destroy the evidence. And they've managed to successfully assassinate that person, sparing his wife, who was right next to him. Sorry, and they managed to do that. So, by the way, this is what, in fact, Israel should have done for Hamas. If the real objective, which, newsflash, it is not, but if the real objective was, as they say, the eradication of Hamas, which is always funny because you still have the head of Hamas living his best life in Qatar at the moment, and Israel has not even as much as asked, as demanded that he be released or that he be delivered to them, to Qatar, which is supposed to be an allied country of the United States, by the way, and also an allied country of France. You know, Qatar.
Turkey.
Yeah, right. And to Turkey as well. And Qatar owns one of the most popular soccer teams in France, the Paris team, right? So, I mean, it makes no sense. Israel has not even as much as demanded that the head of Hamas, Khaled Meshal, which they tried to assassinate already. I mean, they tried to pour poison in his ear, Hamlet style. That was really Shakespearean there. They tried that, and it failed because they caught the guy and they asked for the antidote for his release. So the thing is, if really Hamas was the target, and the eradication of Hamas was the target, well, they would have done targeted assassinations using the Mossad, which is quite efficient, as we know. I mean, back in the day, they even arrested Nazis in Argentina, who were deep undercover. So they can do such a thing, but they're not even thinking about doing it. Plus, Hamas is pretty much everywhere because, as you know, the way it works is actually the way of a cartel. Hamas is a contraband system in the first place. Now, of course, they're doing terrorist operations as well. And as you know, I need full disclosure. I'm way more sympathetic to Fatah regarding the Palestinian cause. So I'm not quite, I'm not the kind of person who will tell you that what Hamas is doing is resistance. They're even from the perspective of the Palestinian cause, they're fucking it up big time. But in any way, the way they operate is that of a cartel because they're passing contraband in the Gaza Strip. And when you do that, you necessarily become friends with a lot of other cartels in Italy, in Mexico, in the Balkans. That's how they ended up procuring weapons from Ukraine, meaning that you've got Hamas people embedded in Brazilian favelas. And there's no way you would know they're Hamas. You would think they're speaking Portuguese in Brazil, or they're speaking Spanish in Mexico. Even myself, when I was living in California, of course, Latinos would speak to me in Spanish, right? And they would be quite disappointed when I answered with an accent because, for them, I looked Spanish. So meaning that if I can pass as Spanish while I'm actually half Algerian, half Italian and born in France, they can do as well. And this is what they're doing. So Hamas is in Mexico, in Argentina, heavily in Argentina, in fact, in Brazil, and deep undercover over there. And they're, of course, in so many other countries, and their head is in Qatar. You're not going to eradicate them by evacuating Gaza, and that's not even the point. This is pure politics. You're saying that you want to eradicate them, but this is not what you're really wanting to do. And I want to say that, sorry, but I just want to conclude on that. I want to say that and to address the 7.5 million Jews you have in the United States, the largest diaspora outside of Israel. I want them to understand that right now, since they're outside Israel, they must feel that they need to be sympathetic to the Netanyahu-Ben Gvir administration, which is not even managing to have a 22% favorable opinion poll. But what they're doing, their agenda is not in the interest of the state of Israel at all whatsoever.
It's very interesting that you bring up demographics because right now, if we take into account Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, there's approximately one Palestinian for one Israeli Jew. I think it's 6.6 million Palestinians now and 7 million Israeli Jews. So perhaps the right wing in Israel saw this trend and they knew that eventually, if there comes to a peaceful solution, the people there in Palestine will eventually have their land. There's only, multiple solutions, but imagine if there's one land and you have 50% Palestinians, so they will definitely have a role in the politics of the country, or even if they want their own state, they're going to be numerous enough to have a political weight. So I
Well,
think
that's right. Yeah.
so.
You've been quoting quite often Bernard Lugan, the French analyst and historian, and he mentioned as much regarding African politics, because especially for former French colonies, we, the French, I'm also a reserve officer of the French Navy, so I'm feeling like I should say we. And well, we created states, multi-ethnic states, where elections are usually ethnic polls. Basically, you've got the candidate of such ethnic groups and the candidate of such ethnic groups. And since it's never 50-50, one ethnic group ends up winning the elections all the time. And then, of course, the minority is being very upset. Plus, as Bernard Lugan explains really well, this minority group usually used to be violent, used to be, say, the Tuaregs, or they used to be raiding, especially in the Middle Ages and all that. And they used to compensate their being a minority by raiding the majority, and they were nomadic peoples, and the majority were like pastoral or farmers. And usually those ethnic rifts in the politics of those states we left in Africa still shows today. Professor Bernard Lugan calls it the ethno-mathematics, the electoral ethno-mathematics. Well, you've got the same problem in Israel right now. Now, of course, you had two possible solutions. One was completely utopian. You know, when I was younger, I believed in it as well, like a one-state solution, but that would be impossible to imagine. First off, because the Israeli point of view is that their country is still very small, and it is. I mean, you have to admit it's very small. It's super hard to defend. Its borders are terrible. In the region, if you want to understand the conflict, you have to understand that the British administration plus the UN created unacceptable borders for everybody. I mean, Israel has one of the worst borders in the world, right? And their borders are terrible. I mean, the borders of France are way better. The borders of Algeria are infinitely better. The borders of Israel are awful. Like, nobody would accept such borders. But who has worse borders than them? The West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Well, if you want, the only people who've got worse borders than Israel in the region are the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Their borders are even worse. But Israel is going to say, look, those are Arab states anyway, right? They're not states, but they're Arab populations. As you know, some Israeli, and this is becoming more and more popular as a point of view, will tell you that the Palestinian people was invented and that the Arabs just invented that people to mess with them. Well, this is politics there, because if we really want to delve deep into the archaeology, basically the Palestinian people is the Peleshet of the Bronze Age collapse. So it goes back to Ramses III in about, say, 1177 BC. And in 1177 BC, you had the Bronze Age collapse, not precisely at this time, but around that time. And the Egyptian Empire collapsed, and the Hittite Empire collapsed, and the Akkadians collapsed. And you had those sea people, the Shekelesh, that's probably Sicily, right? Shekelesh, Sicily. The Shardana, Sardinia, probably. And you had the Peleshet, of which the genetic background is most probably Northern Greek, or possibly the north of the Black Sea, meaning that there would be a tremendous historical irony, which meaning that they would actually have the same genetic background as the Khazars, the famous Khazars, which in fact converted to Judaism way 1,700 years later. So the Peleshet became the Palestinians. And even if you want to adopt a religious perspective, which you're completely entitled to, because in the area you can't really understand the situation without understanding religion as well. And as you know, even Benjamin Netanyahu quoted the book of Isaiah, right? He said, we're going to fulfill the Isaiah prophecy. So, and even the Speaker of the House in the United States, mind you, said that we were in biblical times. So this is not a fringe point of view. This is something that's being evoked and that's being summoned as well. And in this situation, you would have to think from a Jewish point of view that who the Jewish call. So, you know, in the Jewish religion, you can't say God because you can't call the name of God in vain. So you would say Akadosh Behu, right? Akadosh Baruch Hu. meaning the blessed one, may his name be blessed. And well, you have to think, if you're Jewish, that Akadosh Baruch Hu is testing you and has been testing you and your people for 3,000 years, having the Peleshet and the different peoples of Israel, because at the time you had many tribes and you had many kingdoms. Mind you, you didn't have only the kingdom of Solomon, you had also the kingdom of Israel, and there were two different kingdoms, and they were tested. So even from this point of view, you could argue that this is a biblical test, and that God is watching from above, and that He's trying to understand whether we will be smart enough to find a solution. So to wrap it up, you have to understand really regarding this eschatological point of view. So eschatology being the study of the end of times. From this point of view, who is Benjamin Netanyahu? That's quite interesting. People don't know his background, and it's fascinating. First off, in 1988, Benjamin Netanyahu met with one of the greatest saints of the Jewish religion, an amazing person, Mr. Schneerson. That's how the public knows him, but he's known as the Rebbe, meaning the master. It's like Jedi masters, if you will, right? So he was Master Yoda, right? So except that rather than being Master Yoda, he was master of the Chabad Lubavitch, right? A Hasidic dynasty that was very popular in New York City. They're the ones who had New York wrapped in this wire, so that you could do Shabbat cleanly. So the entire island of Manhattan is wrapped in this wire. And the Rebbe of Lubavitch met with Benjamin Netanyahu and asked him to accelerate the coming of Mashiach being the Messiah of the Jewish religion. But of course, you've got many ways of saying this, right? So first off, when Benjamin Netanyahu is mentioning the book of Isaiah, this is what he's mentioning: the imminent coming of Mashiach. And actually, you see a lot of rabbis, even French-speaking rabbis, who are mentioning it more and more. I'm quite sure, I didn't check, but if you checked on Google, say Google Trends, and you checked, Mashiach, you would see a peak in the searches. Right. And the difference is that, of course, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a man of peace. He was giving alms. He was mentioning kindness, and he's the founder of his movement, the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov means the master of the good name, meaning he mastered the good name of God. In the Sufi tradition, of which I'm affiliated, mastering the 100 names, the 100th name of God is supposed to be the most important initiation, and the 100th name of God is supposed to be able to resurrect the dead. And this is part of the belief in Jewish religion as well. If you're a practicing Jew, you're supposed to believe factually in the resurrection of the dead. And so this Baal Shem Tov had a lot of quotes saying that kindness and loving your neighbor. I mean, you check the corpus, he didn't write much, but his followers wrote a lot, and he created the Hasidic movement. What he said, you need to be kind to each other and this and that. So for the Rebbe, making Mashiach come was about kindness and alms and tolerance and this and that. In some of his discourses, he was more of a hardliner, but all in all, this is what you had. But now, regarding the profile of Netanyahu, people think, even expat Jewish people, or people who never traveled to Israel, even though they were Jews. For example, the Rebbe never traveled to Israel, even though he was the most saint Jewish person in the world. And well, most of them don't know that you've got three flavors of Zionism, right? And the Arab world and the Muslim world doesn't know it either. And usually they're, and especially in the situation right now, they're unanimous in condemning Zionism at large. But when you want to study the nuances of the situation there, you have to understand you've got at least three Zionisms. Labor Zionism, which, as the name indicates, is left-wing. General Zionism, which is more the point of view of, say, Yair Lapid or those people, and they're usually center-right, right? And then you've got Revisionist Zionism, which is a fringe movement which has become increasingly more popular. Now, Netanyahu is...
Why has it been more popular?
Yeah, it's becoming more and more popular. Why? Well, because of the situation and because of the demographics. But you've got... And also because of... what a lot of anti-Zionists don't really fail to understand, because anti-Zionism, of course, is becoming more and more favorable in the Muslim world at the moment. And what they completely fail to understand is that revisionist Zionism is fueled by anti-Zionism, because it becomes more popular when you've got more anti-Zionism around. So let me wrap it up for you. The point, the agenda of labor Zionism was create a state of Israel, make sure that its borders are defended, and then it's all right. You've achieved your goal. GG, good game, as you like to say in your great on your great channel. So this was the point of Ben Gurion. This was the point of Golda Meir, and what they did was have those borders, okay, and also procured a nuclear weapon for Israel. As you know, Israel is a nuclear country. It's forbidden to mention it inside the country, right? It's forbidden to say it inside Israel, which is why recently the heritage minister of Netanyahu, who is a Zionist revisionist, mentioned that they had the nuclear bomb. He said he could use it on Gaza, which was a very stupid comment to make. And in fact, Yair Lapid said as much, said it was very stupid to make as a comment. But he was sanctioned, not really for making such a stupid comment, but for breaking the law of saying that Israel was a nuclear state. In any case, the moment Israel became nuclear, you have to understand that existential threats almost ceased to exist. I wouldn't say they completely ceased to exist, but like they started to be really anecdotal in a way. For example, in 1967, existential threats were real for Israel. They were really real. You could have an occupying force of, say, Syria and Egypt and Jordan occupying Tel Aviv and occupying Jerusalem. This was a real possibility. That's what you call an existential threat. Now, to cope with that, to prevent that from happening, the labor Zionists, some of them were even atheists. In fact, they were, Marxists or Trotskyists and materialists, and even Ben Gurion said, one day we won't even have rabbis in Israel anymore. So of course it infuriated the right wing, and today a lot of rabbis condemn Ben Gurion for that. But so when Golda Meir managed to have the nuclear weapon, and she even warned the Egyptians that she had it during the Kippur War, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. It was over for the labor Zionist agenda, because they had their borders and they had the nuclear weapon, meaning that no neighboring country could invade them anymore. Right? It would be, and they even have in that case the so-called Samson Option, which is official policy, right? So in reference to Samson in the Bible, may I die with the Philistine already in Gaza, in fact, because it happens in Gaza in the Bible already 3,000 years ago. And the Samson Option is, if you as much as cross our border with tanks, we're going to blow the entire region up. We don't mind, right? We're going to blow Jerusalem. We're going to blow everything. And well, as crazy as it sounds, it worked, because Israel is a very small country with no strategic depth, right? You can basically cross the country in a couple of hours. So they need to have this so-called mad dog doctrine, which was summarized by General Moshe Dayan, saying we need to be like a mad dog. Like the moment you even look at us, we're going to respond disproportionately, because we have no strategic depth. So we can't afford to lose.
Right now.
Sorry?
So don't you think it's something they're doing right now again?
Well, this is exactly where I was going, because they're answering disproportionately, and Israel has done that all the time. But there's no existential threat to Israel anymore. I mean, Hamas, even though they had those terror attacks, which were obviously unacceptable, there was no existential threats. Hamas cannot occupy Tel Aviv in any way or form. They cannot occupy Jerusalem in any way or form. There was no existential threat to Israel, even after those terror attacks, which should have been dealt with by targeted assassinations and putting a competitor to Hamas in Gaza, by the way, which Netanyahu was adamant he should not do, because he said Hamas was the best party to finance and to fund, which he did.
Don't you think that it would just prolong the situation, because there was the Fatah in Gaza, they replaced it with Hamas, and Hamas,
which is worse, right?
And if they bring someone else, they could continue the fighting.
Well, you have one movement which painfully became non-violent, because the Fatah officially renounced violence and has not led any terror attack on Israel since, and is recognizing Israel in the first place. I mean, this is a much better organization to speak to from a peaceful point of view. But if you've got a revisionist Zionist agenda, which is the case of Netanyahu, you don't want them because you don't want them to create a situation where you would have to politically recognize Gaza, which you don't want. So coming back to this opposition between labor Zionism and revisionist Zionism, because they hate each other in the first place, and they even kill each other in the sense that Yitzhak Rabin was a proponent of labor Zionism. You could even say a triumphant labor Zionist, because when Yitzhak Rabin was premier, all the agenda of labor Zionism was achieved, right? The borders, the nuclear bomb, plus the development of the territory, because it was their point to develop irrigation and also civilian nuclear power. So their flagship city was Dimona. Right? Dimona was created to welcome Russian immigrants, Jewish Russian immigrants to Israel, the so-called Revisionist, because they were refused exit visas during the USSR. And Dimona is also where the nuclear bomb was developed for Israel, but it's also one of the most innovative areas for irrigation, because it's in the middle of the freaking desert. So they need to develop irrigation. And this was the agenda. Well, Yitzhak Rabin at the time, acknowledging that the agenda had been achieved, was completely open to a two-state solution, saying, okay, the West Bank is going to be, we're going to take some territory of the West Bank, but still it's going to be recognized as a state, and Gaza will be recognized as a state, and it could have become, with a lot of money and a lot of patience, some kind of Singapore or Monaco or Limassol in Cyprus, some tax haven, which could have had a few Israeli at its board as well, could have, city-states, because after all, the Philistines were already organized in city-states 3,000 years ago, the so-called Pentapolis, right, the five cities. So Yitzhak Rabin was killed by a revisionist Zionist because it was considered treason for them. And then not long after, you had a massacre or terror attack by Baruch Goldstein, who was a revisionist Zionist militant who killed dozens of people in the Patriarch, I forgot the name, Mount, in next to Jerusalem. So now, where does Netanyahu stand from this point of view? Well, first, Netanyahu's father was the personal secretary of the founder of revisionist Zionism, Mr. Jabotinsky. Mm-hmm. And Jabotinsky and Ben-Gurion is, of course, the founder of Israel, the founding father. And Ben-Gurion hated Jabotinsky, like he despised him. He considered he was a fascist, and he said as much in many discourses. And he said, actually, Jabotinsky was a personal friend of Mussolini, and Mussolini praised him on several occasions in his correspondence. So, of course, when you're Ben-Gurion and you're left-wing and you're a Marxist and Trotskyist, you're not quite sympathetic to someone who's been praised by Mussolini. But still, I mean, Jabotinsky was despised by the founding fathers, and at the time, revisionist Zionism had almost no supporters, like very few supporters in Israel. Now, you have to understand that Benjamin Netanyahu was educated in the United States, and there's a reason for that, which is that his father thought at the time, I kid you not, that Israel was almost a satanic state, like for real, because it was left-wing, because it was labor Zionism. And so for Benjamin Netanyahu's father, Israel was not fit as a place to raise his children. So they were raised in the United States. And at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu and his brother, Jonathan, who was killed because he was special force, both became special force. Both were in the Shayeret, Metkal, the I don't know what Delta Force maybe would be the equivalent, Delta Force, and Netanyahu's brother was killed in a equivalent to Delta Force operation in Uganda during a hostage situation. He was in fact the only special force killed there. So Benjamin Netanyahu saw it as a sign of destiny in a way. And so at the time Netanyahu lived in the United States, he was known as Ben Nitai. He Americanized his name because really, for his father and him, Israel was not fit. And after the end of the Cold War, it became really, labor Zionism, having achieved its goals, became less and less popular. And also demographically speaking, since you had more and more Orthodox Jews, of course, not all Orthodox Jews would be sympathetic to revisionist Zionism at all. But all things being equal, you will find a higher proportion of pro-labor Zionism people among Orthodox Jews, especially the Haredim, which means the ones who tremble before God. And well, it created, an opening for people like Ben Gvir, who is really, without Ben Gvir, Netanyahu cannot be in power, and he knows it very well. And Ben Gvir is the head of internal security, so he may also be held accountable for the catastrophe of October the 7th.
Do you think that he knew about the attack or not? Because from what you tell me, there is every incentive to let it happen, because everything you tell me is that they knew it would happen and they would let it play out so they could push their political agenda. From what you tell me, this is what I get.
Well, it's becoming more and more a possibility, in the sense that they would never have expected the situation to blow in their face that much. But if I'm quoting the Israeli press, which again, expats, I'm talking about Israeli expats, or even just Jews who've never been in Israel, they don't read that press, even though sometimes it's in English, right? You're talking about the Times of the Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, and Haaretz. Now, of course, Haaretz is a hardline labor Zionist journal, meaning that they attack Netanyahu all the time, because their line is labor Zionism. In any case, those journals, all three, Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, and Haaretz, have said as much. On October the 8th, Time of Israel said in English, for years, Netanyahu has nurtured Hamas, and it's blown in our face. This is what they've said. That's why so many people were calling for his immediate impeachment, because we have evidence, of course, that he said in a discourse in 2019 that Hamas needed to be supported. Right? He said for every Jew who doesn't want a two-state solution should let us support Hamas, which is crazy when you think about it, right? And second, you had Yossi Cohen, the head of Mossad, who confirmed he traveled to Qatar to ask them to finance Hamas, not Gaza. Right now, they're trying to spin it to say, no, we were benevolent, we were trying to finance Gaza. No, actually, at the time, the instruction was finance Hamas. Of course, they will finance Gaza, but now every time they finance the water system of Gaza, and in fact, they even use water pipes to make rockets. So that's another story. But every time they would fund Gaza, what would happen was Hamas. Sorry, what would happen is that they would create clients in Gaza, like a mafia, if you will, because in the end, it works the same way, right? You remember Pablo Escobar was quite popular in Colombia because he was building football fields and having pensions, and even as a fun fact to know, in the history of the United States, the reason you have an expiration date on milk bottles in the United States is Al Capone, because there was a young girl who became really ill with bad milk, and Al Capone lobbied and organized himself in Chicago to have those expiry dates on milk. So, he did a few, and he actually had, how do you call that? Meals for the poor, and the donut and coffee for working people. So it made him quite popular. Hamas is working in the same way in the Gaza Strip, but you have to be clear that even the Israeli press acknowledges that Yossi Cohen, the head of Mossad, traveled to Qatar in 2019, same year as when Netanyahu said it was actually a good idea to fund Hamas publicly. I mean, it wasn't a private conversation, it was a public one. And said that we should fund Hamas because in this way we're going to kill a two-state solution forever, which, of course, was despicable for left-wing Zionism, for labor Zionism. For them, it was suicidal and despicable at the same time. And again, all those nuances the expats never get. In both camps. I mean, the pro-Palestinians will never get those nuances because they're not even aware in the first place that you've got so many flavors of Zionism, and that sometimes they can be quite opposite to each other, so much so that they end up killing each other. And for the Jewish expats, they don't know either. They just know that they need to back their state, and right now the head of the state is Netanyahu.
However, don't you think that perhaps they said that because during the last year, in the last few years, Hamas was becoming more peaceful. They went undercover. I made a video about this, whereas it's more the Islamic Jihad that was fighting Israel, whereas Hamas said, okay, we're going to slow down, and perhaps this is why they could talk to each other.
Well, I completely agree that this is an interpretation, but personally, I don't believe in it a bit, because I mean, again, Israel has one of the best intelligence service on the planet, and you've got so many. First off, remember that the Egyptian intelligence warned, and they confirmed that they warned 3 days prior. They warned the Israeli intelligence that something big was going to happen, and we have this fact. Second, you even have another center-right, well, in our standards, it would be more right-wing, but say right-wing politician who's Avigdor Lieberman. And Avigdor Lieberman was the founder of Israeli party Israel Beitenu, meaning Israel Our House. And he made not like an estimation, if you will, simulation, like he anticipated exactly this situation. He made a scenario. That's the word I was looking for. He made a scenario. I think it was in 2019 or 2018. All that happened at this time. And he said, look, this is what's going to happen if we continue with Hamas and this and that. And it was really accurate. Like what he described was what happened. And that's one of the reasons that you've got protesters in the streets in Israel right now saying, give us the hostages and take Bibi, right? Because is under huge pressure. Plus, before the October 7th events, he was already accused of preparing a coup in a way. Not a constitutional coup, because Israel doesn't have a constitution. It's got fundamental laws, but it doesn't have a constitution per se. But at the time, Netanyahu wanted to completely change the way the justice system would work, and that would exonerate him because he's being sued for corruption, among other things. And already the press was accusing him of preparing a coup in a way, and or at least a constitutional imbalance, or altering the checks and balances, the fragile, we must say, checks and balances that have been established in the state of Israel. And that's why he had an approval rating of, say, 20%, which you must admit is terrible. Even in a parliamentarian system in which you don't, the president is not the chief executive. And so you can take power with 19%, because what matters is that you be the majority among a three-part majority that makes more than 50%. So if you cut 50 in three, 19 is going to make you the majority. So the situation was already bad for Netanyahu, but right now is buying time. But you've got so many facts against him. You've got so many facts showing that he was warned in many ways over many years, and that he ignored those warnings. You've got even more incriminating facts that the internal security asked. You've got a lot of ham radios in Israel, amateur radios, and which was the origin of Silicon Valley when you think about it, right? Beginning of the 20th century, a lot of ham radio operators. You've got a lot of them in Israel as well, and a lot of volunteers, civilians, listening, tapping into the frequencies used by Hamas, or all the frequencies of the Gaza Strip. And internal security has asked them to stop doing that. Can you believe it? I mean, it was a formal asking. You should stop listening to what's going on in the radio space of the Gaza Strip. Well, that's incriminating as well. Why would you do such a thing? I mean, those people are quite happy to do that. It's fun for them, or they think they're doing their part. And it would have helped. Necessarily, it would have helped, but, well, internal security asked them not to do that. So that's a lot of incriminating things. So, of course, to make it clear, I'm not saying in any way that it was a false flag operation or that Netanyahu did it, but that he was completely reckless in allowing this event to meet a lax security, lax anticipation, lax intelligence, and that he was reckless in ignoring the warnings of Egypt and of other intelligence. That, I think, is what happened. Yes.
And do you think that this is a theory that's out there? Don't you think that we could position the conflict in the Middle East right now with Israel with the one in Ukraine, Russia? So, for example, Russia and Ukraine, what if they started, Russia, Iran, their allies, what if they started a second front, contre-feu, So, for example, they would open the front in the Middle East to force the United States and Europe to divert ammunition from Ukraine to Israel. And this is what's been happening. So Ukraine now is struggling to get new weapons, new military equipment, because a lot of it now is being diverted to Israel. and there's a, let's say, more important fight for the United States. Now, so that's one interpretation, but the second one could be that Iran launched the attack, ordered Hamas to launch the attack to push Saudi into a corner. I mentioned it a few times because, let's be honest, Israel was getting more and more recognized by the Arab world. Relations, diplomatic relations would get normalized. And even with Saudi Arabia, they were getting closer and closer. They have, let's be honest, they have the same enemy, which is Iran. So perhaps in this case, Iran faced, they would be pushed into a corner by pushing a war with Hamas. It would push the entire Muslim world to see the actions of these countries. You said it yourself. The Arab countries are ruled by their streets. So if the streets wants a political position, it's going to put their government in a very difficult situation. And now, it's very plausible that Iran wants to push Saudi Arabia to fully admit their alliance with Israel.
Well, I know those two analyses, and personally, I'm ruling them out. So I'm gonna explain you why I'm ruling them out. But I don't want your audience to buy my point of view wholesale, right? Your audience can position themselves the way they want, and they can use my analysis as a reference, and then position themselves either against or for, or laterally speaking, right, oblique to it. The reason I'm ruling them out. So let's take each of them separately. Okay. It would have been good for Russia to do such a thing because, yeah, you've got less weapons to being sent to Ukraine. But, I mean, it's completely disproportionate because Russia was already winning. And you, of course, said as much in most of your videos, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive had already failed, and it had failed like big time. Colonel McGregor estimates that you've got 500,000 casualties at least. Based on analysis of satellite images of graveyards in Ukraine, at least 500,000 casualties, which is a lot when you think about it. That's really a lot, way more than the Vietnam War was, I think, on the American side, something in the range of 60,000, right? So you're talking about 10 times more there, not even adjusted with the population, because obviously Ukraine has a much smaller population than the United States. So Ukraine was already losing. And on the logistics side, they were already losing. You had a lot of newspapers, news articles showing that for every shell being fired by the Ukrainian military, you had about 7 or 10 times more shells on the Russian side already. From a logistical point of view, they were already winning. So now they would do such a thing in a situation where they were already winning, and when they had all the patience in the world, because sanctions completely failed. I mean, in Europe, we know that they completely failed. Russia is having a 3.5% GDP growth this year, 3.5%. That's more than the United States, significantly more, in fact. And significantly more than Germany, than France. Germany is in a recession, so they've got negative growth this quarter. And so Russia had all the time they wanted. They could have waited 2 years more, which is what they want to do, actually, because right now the United States are pressuring the Zelensky administration into negotiations, meaning they are losing, right? And meaning at some point the Russian Federation could threaten Odessa, and that would be a catastrophe. So they were already winning, and they would bargain such a winning position for a slightly better one, which was not like decisively, more winning, but okay, they would bargain this position for World War III, which is what Russia is preparing itself for. So if Russia was behind those attacks, plus you have to add that you've got at least 2.5 million Jews in Israel who speak Russian, so let's say, and sometimes have dual citizens. Which, by the way, is the reason that the United States is forbidding Israel to fly F-35s with the dual citizens. Right? Dual citizens don't have the right to fly F-35s in Israel because of those 2.5 million Russian-speaking Jews in which obviously you've got SVR and a few SVR agents embedded, right? It can't be any other way, right? You must have a few deep undercover among those. So you would, that would be another problem for Russia to do such a thing, because they want to have good relations with Israel. That's why also Israel didn't really support Zelensky, even though he was Jewish. And Naftali Bennett at the time was the premier of the Israeli state, asked in a frontal way that Zelensky would not be assassinated by Putin. So he asked really directly, I want, Mr. Putin, I want your insurance that President Zelensky will not be disposed of. And Putin said, guaranteed Naftali Bennett that. And that was because, of course, the state of Israel considers that they must protect Jews everywhere in the world. And Zelensky being a Jew, and high-profile one, it would be a failure of this mission if he ended up assassinated. So for the first analysis, Russia would bargain a winning situation for a slightly better winning situation, which would come with World War III, with risk of World War III. And Russia is running exercises, is becoming the most nuclear prepared country in the world, and they are launching nuclear vectors, of course, without nuclear detonations, but they could go as far. I mean, the last stop before Armageddon would be a nuclear test, that Russia would detonate a nuclear weapon, saying we're conducting tests. And in the TikTok era, it would really be a signal, because like in those times when the Soviets detonated the Tsar Bomba, it was already a shock. But if they would detonate this level of detonation today, of course, everybody would be talking about it. So to me, this rules out a Russian involvement in the Hamas attack. Now, regarding the Iranian one, well, that makes a lot more sense, because the nemesis of Iran in the area is Saudi Arabia. And indeed, Saudi Arabia was getting closer to Israel within the Abraham Accords, which, by the way, Biden is touting, but in fact was negotiated by the Trump administration. But at the time, the weakness of the Abraham Accord was, of course, that it abstracted the Palestinians, right? Palestinians didn't really exist in it. You have to remember that the son-in-law of Donald Trump is Jared Kushner, who's a Jew, and his daughter converted to Judaism, if memory serves, and to wed him. And in that situation, that created a good way for Trump to negotiate. But Trump and Netanyahu don't like each other at all. In fact, Netanyahu is not very liked by heads of states in the world, by Putin or by Obama. Obama hated him. And also Sarkozy at the time hated him. But in any case, the Abraham Accords had created a situation where you had Saudi Arabia getting closer to Israel, and that was a problem for Iran. But okay, I mean, you have to look in a game theoretical manner at the situation. Iran is where chess was popularized, right? Checkmate is actually an Iranian name. This is Chekhmata, which means at the time in Arabic, which was also spoken in Iran, which means the king is dead, right? Checkmate is the king is dead. So the Iranians are chess players. They're a country of engineers. They've got top mathematicians. You've got an Iranian American who got the Fields Medal, and she was the first woman to get the Field Medal. In fact, Miriam Mirsahani at Stanford University. They're smart people. You can't take that from them. And from a game theoretical perspective, they're in trouble right now. They're in trouble. Their situation is not good at all, and they're trying to not escalate that much, even though, of course, from a historical perspective, Hezbollah has said they could sink U.S. aircraft carriers. Hezbollah has anti-ship missiles. They're not the best. They're not hypersonic, but they've got the newer missiles, and those newer missiles are actually retro-engineered Chinese missiles, which had French propulsion systems. So, and they're still effective. I mean, they're more than decent, but they're not hypersonic. So the close-in weapon system of the aircraft carrier groups could deal with them, but they don't want an escalation. And in my opinion, if they really had been behind the Hamas attack, they would have done a Kippur style, 1973 style attack, coordinated. But of course, right now, the fact that you've got Hezbollah with their 150,000 soldiers on the border is also one of the reasons for which the Netanyahu administration is waiting and is not entering the Gaza Strip yet. First off, because a lot of people say that the Israeli army is in one of
the Gaza Strip. They haven't stripped Gaza.
they've you would say they've put their toes in the water, right? They're testing the waters, but it's not a Fallujah style operation yet, right? It's they've had what, the total casualties are like 40 people. This is not a Fallujah style operation, but when it will be, that will be a bloodbath for sure, because you've got the tunnel systems, you've got the ruins, and that's why they're waiting. Plus, of course, if Hamas doesn't have any more oil or any more gas, then the ventilation system would be turned off. But it's quite certain that Egypt is providing them with this in the most secret way, but still they're doing it. But the fact that you've got those Hezbollah troops up north is posing a problem right now. And as you said in a lot of your analysis, which I'm quoting, the Israeli army has grown really risk avert, like casualty avert. And back in the days, of course, first off, you need to remember that the Israeli army is really armor-centric, like heavily armor-centric. Back in the day, they had one armor division for every infantry division, which happens in no country, anywhere, because their ideal battlefield was the Sinai and the Golan, right? So both areas are good for armor. So back in the day, they had one armor battalion for every infantry battalion. Now the ratio is 1-3, but still it's an armor-centric army. And of course, in one of the most urbanized areas in the world, one of the most densely populated areas in the world, that is the Gaza Strip, which is about the surface area of Grozny, the Chechen war. Armor is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem more than a solution. And since Hamas has Javelin missiles, which again, the mainstream media in the United States is not reporting, right? And the reason they're not is because it's an absolute failure, right? Those missiles were procured by the United States to Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine is corrupt. If you say Russia is corrupt, which it is, well, then welcome to Ukraine, which is one of the few countries that is more corrupt.
But we have not seen them use such weapons yet.
Well, they can't, right? I mean, you didn't have a Merkava 3 showing up, needing a Javelin system to be disposed of, but you will see them being used. And a lot of intelligence analysts have reported that they do have those, and plus NLOs, plus, of course, maybe from the Hezbollah, you don't know. Remember that Hezbollah and Hamas fought each other, though, in Syria, for example. But they could have RPG-29 Vampires, which are, of course, more... Yeah. So that's going to be a mess, and that won't contribute to the popularity of Netanyahu whatsoever.
Right. But so you don't think there's a link between this war, Iran, Syria, Iran, this axis which has Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad?
No, there is. Yeah. I mean, no, there is.
Right. The Shias from Iraq that are now attacking U.S. bases. Yeah. So don't you think that there's something moving there against the axis of, because look, if from the Iranian perspective, by pushing all these Palestinians into Egypt, it would weaken Egypt, which is one of their enemies too. It would put the Arab world very angry at Saudi Arabia for not doing anything. So it could have an effect. But I think from what I've read, from what you said, Hamas acted on its own. So nobody knew that they would do it, perhaps except Israel.
Yeah, well, that's why Nasrallah said we've been at war since the 8th, trying to distance themselves from what Hamas did. Mm-hmm. And again, I mean, Iran is in a bad situation right now because they could be bombed by Israel. Iran doesn't have the nuclear bomb at the moment. They could have it really fast. Because they're, when the United States developed their nuclear program, of course, there was no internet, right? You had Dr. Vannevar Bush, who theorized what would become hypertext, but that would not become a reality until the 90s, right? And so there was no way you could hack. You could spy. And of course, you had a lot of communist spies in the Manhattan Project, but everything was mechanical. The Iranians have learned that lesson with the Stuxnet breach. And so now their centrifuges are mechanical, not connected. And they're enriching uranium, no doubt, but they're doing it in a low-tech way, right? And they could have the bomb, but they don't have it yet. And well, if the Gaza Strip is evacuated, I guarantee you're going to have a nuclear scramble all over the Arab world.
Because right now
So
it's a proxy war. Why would
yeah,
Israel bomb Iran if it's a proxy? They would use their proxies, the Houthis, the Hezbollah. It's not really Iran.
if Hezbollah invaded Israel, Israel would bomb Iran.
Okay.
No doubt at all. Now Hezbollah is not good at invading anybody. They're really good when they're entrenched, as they showed in 2006. At the time, they dealt massive casualties to the Israeli army. It was a wake-up call. And soon after, you had a cast-led operation on the Gaza Strip. And at the time, Ariel Sharon decided that the Gaza Strip should be evacuated. But Ariel Sharon considered that Netanyahu was hardcore compared to him, which is, I mean, again, to be hardcore compared to Ariel Sharon, you really need to be rising early. But the situation is that Hezbollah cannot attack Israel in a convincing manner, but they can deal damage to Israel by launching missiles. Yeah, they have a lot of them. They've got more and more. They could saturate. Right, the Iron Dome system is easily saturated, and they could saturate it. Plus, the Houthis could saturate. The Houthis are quite too far, though. I mean, their missiles are not high tech enough. But Iranians' missiles are way high tech enough to saturate Israel. And in this case, no doubt, Israel would bomb Iran, and you would have the beginning of World War III. So this is what Dugin has said, right? Dugin, as you know, is quite listened to in Russia, and he considers himself a starret, right? An old man, like a Rasputin, if you will. Rasputin was a starret, right? Those old, wandering old men who were wandering the depths of Siberia and were listened to, and sometimes were healers. And Dugin is, you might say, a superior mind, but he's becoming quite gloomy at the moment because his daughter was assassinated by a joint Ukrainian CIA operation, and his daughter was, of course, the how do you call that, the light of his life. And so you can see by his tweets, when you analyze his Twitter feed, he's grown way more, way darker, way gloomier. And he's openly mentioning the apocalypse. He says, look, because you've got a hadith in the Muslim tradition. So, the hadith are like the Muslim traditions. They're not the Quran. They're not quite the Quran, but they're like eyewitness accounts of what Prophet Muhammad might have done, has done. And so one of the hadith mentions, it's called the Black Flag Hadith, or the Black Flags of Khorasan, right? And Khorasan being Iran. And when black flags are hoisted in Khorasan, this is supposed to be the end of the world. And the hadith says you should crawl, even if you have to crawl, join the army that will be under the banners of the black flag of Khorasan. And Dugin has mentioned that, but Dugin is, of course, an Orthodox Christian. He's mentioned that on Twitter in reference to a few black flags being hoisted in Iran in an ambiguous way. There was some level of plausible deniability. They could say they have hoisted them for mourning, just for mourning. This is actually what community notes on Twitter have said, but I can guarantee you it was slightly more than your average mourning black flag in Iran. So this eschatological perspective, which should never be downplayed, is also playing a huge role in the way Iran may react, or in the way Israel may perceive Iran. You know that Iran calls Israel Satan, the smaller Satan. You've got the greater Satan and the smaller Satan. And of course, Israel considers Iran possibly as one of the people of the apocalypse as well. Could be Gog and Magog. In the apocalypse in the Bible, you will have Gog and Magog. So some rabbis consider that Gog is Putin and Magog is Russia. But in the Arab world, it's something else. Gog and Magog are other people. You've got other eschatological imams who think otherwise. And again, this dimension is completely influencing decision making. So that's why a lot of Ivy League educated valedictorians cannot understand that if they don't understand that you've got a lot of irrationality in the mix, which you shouldn't have in a nuclear shooting war, in any war in the area. But now you've got a lot of irrationality involving all the players.
Idriss, since you always come up with such brilliant analysis in your videos that I watch religiously, what are some of 3 outcomes that you could see in this Gaza-Israel war?
Well, I would really like that we saw beautiful, peaceful outcome of people coming back to their mind, and somebody like Ehud Olmert, or because again, labor Zionism is not really, Golda Meir, Ben Gurion, Yitzhak Rabin. Labor Zionism died with Yitzhak Rabin, essentially. It never came back to power, and it never really influenced Israeli policy as much as it would during the heydays of Golda Meir.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would be looking for some kind of leader, ideally a woman, of course. Even Golda Meir was like really hardcore, but she was, in some of her perceptions were that she was even criticized for being a woman in a way. And that's why she left office, in fact, even though she won. I mean, she won the Kippur War, right? So I would hope that that's quite utopian, that leaders would come back to their sense, that on the Israeli side they would understand, they would stop emoting, as again Colonel McGregor is reminding. They would stop emoting, because you have to think like a coroner, right? You've got a body to dissect. You should not be emoting, right? That's why in forensic science, you should not be knowing the victim that you are dissecting, right? It should not be a relative. Otherwise, you won't be able to do your job. So everybody should be clinical. You could say cynical even, but let's say clinical rather than cynical. Everybody should be clinical about the conflict, especially expats, because expats, they want to show that they feel guilty. They go like, oh my God, I've not been mobilized. I'm not fighting for Israel right now. So they usually become way more vehement. They become way more emotional, and that's actually terrible even for the security of Israel at the moment, because never in the history of Israel has the Muslim world been that united. It's never happened. So it's, again, the way Israel has reacted, the way the Netanyahu administration has reacted, because of the emotional reaction, and of course of this agenda that's been released by WikiLeaks. Now Israel has traded a situation where there was no existential threat against them whatsoever. They could have got their revenge. They could have gotten their revenge, no problem at all. It would have taken a couple of years, but they could even have arrested Khalid Mishal, kidnapped him the way they did Eichmann in Argentina, and judged him in Israel, in a clean way, and then hanged him or whatever. They could have done such a thing, but it was in no way the intention of the Netanyahu administration. But I really wish that the situation would evolve in a more rational way, and people would stop emoting, and then we would move towards a realization by Israeli that, in a way, revisionist Zionism has taken over. They're not even aware of that. I can be telling you in the most positive way. Expat Israeli or Jewish, the Jews all over the world. So you're talking about 8 million people. The first two Jewish diasporas right now are the United States, 7.5 million, and France, about 500,000. They're completely unaware that revisionist Zionism has taken over their country. Completely unaware. And they don't understand the consequences of that at all, because most of them don't even know what revisionist Zionism is. So I wish that they realize that, and they move to a more rational solution to the conflict on both sides. But otherwise, if I'm being pessimistic, you could really evolve to a nuclear shooting war for real. This is a real possibility.
So let me ask you questions, and you say how likely do you think it will happen. So do you think that Israel can militarily take over the entire Gaza Strip?
It's going to cost them a lot. If they want to do it in a conventional way. So of course, there are discussions now at the highest level about using nitrogen in the tunnels, but the tunnels have been made airtight by compartments. But still, I mean, this is the theory. You don't know how it could happen. There's also possibilities that they would use PU foam, what you use to insulate houses in North America, right? Massive, but a lot of PU foam, but Israel doesn't have so much PU foam, but they could synthesize it and block tunnels this way, or use nitrogen, which is not a war gas. So, it's not like using sarin or VX, but the effect is the same in the end. But in a conventional war, you need infantry, right? And it always comes down to the infantryman and his rifle there. And there will be a lot of casualties. And from a political point of view, it's going to be a catastrophe for the current administration. You already had a lot of Israelis in the streets. You will have a lot more when mothers are losing their children. And especially, because right now you've got the coast Israelis and the kibbutzim Israelis, and they're not the same, especially in the West Bank kibbutzim, where there you've got the largest concentration of Haredim and Orthodox Jews, who sometimes see the coast Israelis as decadent in a way, LGBTQ and pride in Tel Aviv and this and that. And of course, they don't see it with a lot of sympathy, and sending them to death because the Orthodox can't be drafted. That's also another point, right? The Orthodox can't be drafted. That they can enroll, of course, but like there's an agreement that they can not be drafted. So in the end, it would be super costly for Israel, and I think a conventional war in Gaza would be really casualty intensive for them.
And all the civilians that still live in Gaza. So many people went to the south of the Gaza Strip, but I think there's still 300,000 apparently.
Yeah. Of course, because a lot of them either are forced or would rather die in their house than in tents, especially more so now that the plan has been leaked, that creating a tent city for 2 million people, which is a war crime, by the way. I mean, any way you put it, it's a war crime. But
in Israel, right? Or
sorry?
The tent city would be where?
In Egypt, of course. Of course. Like, they would never want to have it in Israel. And of course, so you've got rumors about the Ben Gurion Canal, right? That Israel was considering and planning digging a second canal, which is not stupid. I mean, the Chinese were planning it, I think, in Guatemala or Nicaragua, in Central America, to make another canal rather than only the Panama Canal, which, as you know, is controlled by the United States. And so Israel was planning on, has been considering the digging of another canal. And of course, the shortest pathway is from the Gaza Strip. So an evacuation would make it possible. Otherwise, it would take a detour, which would make it financially impossible. Plus, of course, you've got gas deposits, in Gaza. So, but it's a larger field called the Leviathan. I can't really consider it the first cause of an evacuation of Gaza, but it would still be a sweet bonus there. So yeah, definitely the tent city would be in Egypt. Deal with them, not our problems anymore, because we consider, especially revisionist Zionism considers that even more so, that Palestinians don't exist as a people; they're just Arabs. And of course, there are way enough Arabs in the world, way enough Muslims, almost 2 billion Muslims. So from the Israeli point of view, the moving 2 million Gaza inhabitants would not be, in the grand scheme of things, would not be that significant. But of course, you've got a lot of smart diplomats in Israel who perfectly understand what it would entail, because the Israeli diplomacy used to be one of the best in the world, and their whole job was to make sure that this kind of bullshit would not happen. And of course, I'm not talking about, by bullshit, I don't mean the moving of 2 million Palestinians, 2 million Gaza inhabitants, but I'm talking about having the entire Muslim world united against you. This is really the kind of diplomacy that Israel didn't want to happen, and that the smartest diplomats in Israel made sure would not happen. So right now, again, you've got some kind of poker play from the Ben Gvir Netanyahu administration. And this poker play, in my opinion, is completely mad. I mean, I couldn't put it any other way. It's a lunatic poker play. The only reason it works is that everybody's emoting, because if everybody was cool-headed, especially in Israel, they would never have allowed that poker play to happen.
Right. So, number one, you think that if Israel, well, from my understanding, you think that Israel wants to take over the entire Gaza Strip militarily and kick out all the Palestinian population towards Egypt. So this is what you predict, right?
I predict this is the intention. I don't predict this is what's going to happen, because first off, you've got a standoff right now. Okay, you have to understand, we're in a Mexican standoff. So we are in a Tarantino movie right now. In a tight spot, right? Because all those Mexican standoffs in Tarantino movies quite opposed, his master, who was Sergio Leone. in Sergio Leone movies, Mexican standoffs are in the open, right? They're in the Sad Hill Cemetery, or they're in the open with a wide-angle camera in all the grandiosity of the West. But in Tarantino movies, they're in basements, right? Because he didn't have any budget for Reservoir Dogs, and then it's become his signature in Inglourious Basterds, or you name it. So this is what we're having right now. A Mexican standoff in a basement. Now, the basement being the Middle East, but it's super tight. And the Gaza Strip is even tighter because, as I told you, the geopolitical invariant of the region is that all the borders suck. Israel's borders suck. Even if Israel took the West Bank, their borders would still suck. They still suck a little less. They would suck a little less because they would have the Jordan River, right?
But that's a good question. Yeah. Do you think that a follow-up operation, because from what I've read, from what you say about Zionist revisionism, do you think that after Gaza Strip, this follow-up operation would be in the West Bank?
I'm completely positive there. For me, not a shadow of a doubt. That's why
mentioned by the IDF in the West Bank.
Yeah, because that's the reason that Mahmoud Abbas, even though he's got a few corruption cases and this and that, but he's made clear to all the imams in the West Bank: do not mention Gaza in your Friday preach. Do not mention Gaza. Right. So because he is in a tight spot as well. He knows like the slightest mishap could justify an operation in the West Bank, which is already quite tessellated, morselated. So yes, definitely. And Benjamin Netanyahu has shown at the UN that the borders of Israel, according to him, were including the West Bank and Gaza. And in fact, from Labour Zionism point of view, the West Bank could remain Palestinian, it's okay. But from the revisionist point of view, in fact, it should even go on the other side of the Jordan River. The entire kingdom of Israel would be from the Nile to the Euphrates River. This was the point of Jabotinsky. But again, Jabotinsky was a minority at the time. He was not significant in Israeli politics and was, in fact, considered a madman by Ben Gurion and Golda Meir. So, but now his ideas are becoming more and more popular. But I'm completely positive, in fact, yes, that if Netanyahu Ben Gvir, never forget it's really Ben Gvir behind, managed to achieve an evacuation of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank would be next, no doubt.
And do you think that a third operation at one point would be against Hezbollah, South Lebanon, perhaps something from the Golan Heights towards Syria?
Some generals have said as much, but again, you've got a few members of the military now who are sympathetic to the revisionist Zionist agenda. So they said as much, but they're a minority even within the army. I mean, to survive in the army, at some point, you need to be rational. Right, you need to be cool-headed. You need to be rational. You need to be professional, and a lot of the top brass in Israel is completely aware that this would be quite mad. But it's true that now that Lebanon is essentially a failed state, and which is a stronger reason for which Hezbollah has become that dominant in its politics, because Lebanon is a failed state. I mean, its freaking central bank was actually a Ponzi scheme. Which is saying a lot, and so yeah, it would be easier to invade a failed state than to invade Syria, which is a semi-failed state but is still backed by Iran, indeed. So yeah, that could be a possibility. But I mean, we're right now in a Mexican standoff where we don't even know if nuclear weapons will be used. And again, I'm telling you, Russia has been running simulations in which they envision the loss of 1/3 of their population. And if you are considering the Isaiah prophecy, now in Isaiah, you've got Zechariah 13:8, where it is said that 2/3 of the world will die, right? So you've got people, decision makers, not only in Israel, you've got decision makers who believe in that, who believe that at one point something will happen driven by the region, because the region is the destiny of the world, that will kill 2/3 of the global population. So this is a Tarantino style. This is like, if you will, this is Inglourious Bastard making love to Dr. Strangelove. What you're having right now is the love child of Inglourious Bastards and Dr. Strangelove. That's why it's scary. That's why we need to talk about it. That's why, because you won't. I mean, ABC won't be running this kind of analysis. I mean, let's face it. First off, they won't be having like 1 hour and a half talk shows about that. And fortunately, we have more freedom on the internet, and we can also delve deeper into the situation, not just repeat shallow words and shallow analysis, as Chomsky very well understood from the 90s already. And it's important that civilians, or it's important that the global population at large talk about this. Because as I told you, the reason Able Archer in 1983 was actually much more dangerous as a nuclear standoff between NATO and the Warsaw Pact was that the press didn't talk about it. Whereas for the missile crisis in Cuba, the press talked a lot about it, which pushed the civilians into it. And again, Russians love their children too. And in the end, a solution was found. So it's important we talk about it. But right now, we do have a Mexican standoff in the region. Yeah.
Thank you, Idriss. Thank you, Idriss. If you want to follow his work, it's in French mostly. I think on Twitter, sometimes it's in English, but it's mostly in French. You can easily add some subtitles to his excellent videos. Make sure to follow his channel. And once again, thank you, Idriss, for this excellent analysis on what's currently happening in the Middle East.
Thank you, Alexander.